This is NTV.
Good evening. You're just in time for the Nation Leadership Forum. My name is Zena Bondati, and over the next hour or so, we're going to have an exciting conversation about clean cooking and how to achieve universal access to clean cooking for the Kenyan population. Now, we know that the vast majority of Kenya's energy is actually green. The grid is green, but how much of this green energy is actually used to cook is very little. And I have a panel of experts here in studio to tell us why that is. About just 1% of Kenyans are using electricity to cook, despite more than 70% of households being connected to the grid. And we also have about 75% of the population using dirty fuels such as firewood, such as jikos. Even cities, residents of the cities of Nairobi, you live in a fancy neighborhood, fancy apartment, but you just must have that kajiko to cook your githeri. So we're going to have a conversation about how you can be transitioned out of that jiko and how you can live in a sustainable future that is green and a sustainable future that uses green energy. So to introduce my panel of experts, we have on my far right, directly in front of me, we have Dr. Linda Davis, who is the board member of the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya. She'll be telling us why the Clean Cooking Association is very keen on having everyone transition to green energy. And then we have Murefu Baraza, who is the chairperson of the Kenya Renewable Energy Association. We have Dr. Mary Njenga, who is a scientist in bioenergy from ICRAF. And last but not least, the government is represented, Engineer Isaac Kiva, who is Secretary of Renewable Energy in the Ministry of Energy. Later on, we expect that the CS Davis Chirchir will be joining us to talk about the LPG strategy that the cabinet approved last week, and what that means for you as a Kenyan, especially if you're looking to build a house, if you already have a house, what will that mean for you? So when the CS joins us, we'll be able to have that discussion. So you can join this conversation online. The hashtag to use is on your screen, Nation and NMG Leadership Forum. You can tag me at Zainwandati and also at NTV Kenya, and we'll sample your thoughts and your questions to the panel and also to the CS when he joins us. So let's get started. I'd like to start with Dr. Davis. Why clean cooking?
Oh, that's a great question. First and foremost, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for this very, very important conversation. And here, as representing the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, we're an organization that brings together practitioners who are motivated to bring affordable, accessible, safe solutions to Kenyans everywhere. So why clean cooking? Clean cooking is very, very important to our health. The lack of clean cooking fuels is a leading driver of disease in Kenya, bigger than AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria combined. Cooking with an unsafe and traditional fuels in unventilated spaces is a leading driver of poor health. Secondly, when you think about the environment, you know, the lack of clean cooking solutions, using charcoal, using firewood, is a driver of deforestation, and as a consequence, climate change as well. So many Kenyans are really at the forefront of innovative solutions, innovating cooking solutions that will provide minimal indoor house pollutions, and you will be able to cook in a safe environment. And an example of this is the LPG you have in your home. You're not coughing, you're not splattering, you're not wiping your eyes when you're cooking with LPG. When you cook with ethanol, that is the same as well. And there are other innovative solutions that my colleagues will discuss as well that are truly clean, truly safe, and you're cooking in a dignified way, especially for the women of Kenya, who are the ones who take the responsibility for cooking.
Barasa, some might argue that maybe when you push the agenda of clean cooking, you're at war with tradition, because firewood is at the heart of traditional cooking. And there are a number of people who say ugali sitamu kaijapikwa kwa kuni. Mboga haijaiva kaijapikwa kwa kuni. So are we at war with tradition?
Yeah, tradition is good. Let me also start by thanking you and the team for having me on this very, very important conversation. And picking up on what Linda just mentioned, the use of traditional forms of cooking contribute to about 23,000 premature deaths in Kenya every year. This is a statistic from the Ministry of Health. But what's 23,000? deaths. This is 2 times the number of deaths attributed to malaria. And if you think about it, that means 63 Kenyans die prematurely every day because of the way they cook. So this is an absolutely important conversation that needs to be had. 63 Kenyans, it's like 2 33-seater matatus plunging into River Nithi every day, or Ngaindevia every day. 2 plunged yesterday, 2 plunged today, 2 are going to plunge tomorrow.
That's how many people we are killing.
Exactly. So it's a very important conversation. And the question of traditional forms of cooking, it's an important one because people prefer different cooking solutions for different types of foods. But like has been mentioned, there are other cleaner solutions that you can use to prepare those foods.
Dr. Njega, maybe we need to back up a moment and just explain what is clean cooking. When you say clean cooking, what are we talking about really?
When I think about clean cooking, a couple of things close my mind. One of the things is that what type of fuel am I cooking with? And then secondly is that what type of cooking appliances am I cooking? And then the third is what kind of kitchen environment is it? What kind of ventilation is it? You know, and then how am I managing the whole process? Because what we know, all forms of energy, cooking energy, have some form of emissions. It's really the level of emission that matters. So if you are using fuel, for example, firewood, it also can be made cleaner.
Yes.
Because then you need to cook with dry firewood, all right? You have to cure it well. Long time ago when I was growing up, we had laughter in the kitchen. So we could only use dry wood.
That's the thing that you put over the fire to dry the firewood?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So when you dry firewood well and use it in an improved cook stove that produces less emission, then you're improving the whole kitchen environment. And therefore, when we think of clean cooking energy, is the whole system.
So if I have dry firewood and I still have the 3 stones, that is not clean cooking?
Well, the thing is, if I have dry firewood, okay, and then if I am using 3 stone with a lot of ash on it, then there is so little space for air circulation.
Okay.
Long time ago, we used to clean the ashes
Before
and pour
the
them
yes.
on wet ground in the kitchen. Those cultural practices were really geared towards cleaner cooking. So it's these kind of technologies that we are looking at that you have to improve every fuel that you are using and use it in the most efficient way. Because people stack. They use more than one type of cooking fuel. Look at your mother's kitchen, my mother's kitchen. They use more than one fuel.
My mother has 3. She has firewood, she has a jiko, and she has gas.
That's the story.
And sometimes all 3 are used at the same
That's
time.
the story. The story is, in nature, we are all stacking, using more than one fuel. So what we are looking towards is making the whole cooking system cleaner. Reducing emissions as much as we can. And they are standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, engineer, you've heard all they've said and the challenges that Kenya faces and the fact that the vast majority of our population is connected to the grid, but still the vast majority of the population does not use clean cooking solutions. Where is the problem? The government has been talking about moving the country to clean cooking for a very long time, and it's even embedded in Vision 2030, but we seem to be struggling to get there. What is the problem?
Again, thank you so much, Zena, for having us here today to talk about clean cooking and the energy to drive it. Indeed, clean cooking is very important, and energizing this, driving this energy is one of our key pillars at the Ministry of Energy. From where we started, things have been evolving, and people will be able to get into technologies where there is a lot of awareness, where the technology is there, where innovation is there, and affordability is also a crucial factor. So when you look at many of our people, the idea and the government has set a target to transit all people to clean cooking by 2028. And this is going to use a multiplicity of technologies, including electric cooking, including LPG, including ethanol for cooking, all those. And as we get there, as Dr. Mary was saying, we progress by getting people improved cookstoves. They are not entirely clean, but they are much better. They'll be able to reduce effects on deaths, as Morefu and Dr. Linda are saying. They'll be able to afford us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're now looking towards congregating all our efforts. Of course, financing is one of the key things. And when the CS comes, he will be speaking about the LPG and what the government is doing to be able to make it affordable to many people. There's also the issue of awareness. Many people still believe that cooking with electricity is very expensive. And this is something that we need to disabuse this notion with empirical data, with the awareness, with the demonstrations, so that many people can be able to know that indeed it is viable, it is feasible to boil things using electricity.
I'm glad you brought up cooking with electricity, because it came up again during the Africa Climate Summit when we had almost a similar conversation, and Kenyans were not amused when Kenya Power said it is possible to cook githeri with 2 units of electricity. So let's put a pin on that. We'll come back to that for a moment. I'd like to go back to Dr. Davis. As the people on the ground, is there a disconnect between what government says versus what is actually kwa ground? Just sometimes ground were different.
Kwa ground is different.
So is the ground different, or
sure.
is it what the government says?
No, absolutely. I want to pick up something that Engineer Kiva has mentioned, and that is affordability, right? So we can push the solutions as much as we want, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what is in your pocket. Right? So some of these solutions have a bit of a barrier to entry. You have to spend some money, right? So when you look at, one of our member organizations, they're saying, look at a Jikokoa, for instance. Look at a cocoa ethanol stove. Look at an electric cooker. Look at an LPG stove, right? So all that, you have to purchase the equipment, and then you have to commit to buying the fuel on a daily basis. So when you look at our population and disposable income, umeenda mjengo, umeenda kazi, you've brought some money at home, and then having a portion of that be distributed for fuel, sometimes that becomes a challenge. And some of the fuel, for example, like LPG, absent innovation, you have to have stock. Inakuja na mtungi. Mtungi is what, 3,000 bob, or whatever the amount is, So you have to have that amount of money. And that becomes a barrier to a number of the people in our population who are unable to have that stock. Right? So you find that one of the innovations we have to come up with, especially, and these are things that members of the Clean Cooking Association, all the practitioners, is how can we increase affordability? Right? How can we sell fuel on small, kidogo kidogo? Like bundles, uko na 100 leo, you'll still talk. You've got na 200, you'll still talk. How can we do that for fuel as well? Where we can actually have everybody in Kenya be able to afford a clean cooking solution.
So, Morefu, I'd like you to pick up from there, that point of cost. Because that's something that is out of reach for many people. An ordinary jiko, the one with firewood, that one you can buy for 300, ikienda sana 500 shillings, na umepata jiko yako. Kuni ushago zinauzwa 30 bob a bundle, or maybe even 10 bob, depending on where it is you're from. You see, these are very cheap options. And then you bring to me an improved jiko that costs me 3,000 shillings. The vast majority of the people who are using these dirty fuels are in the rural areas, where this 3,000 to get is a problem. How then do you make that cost affordable to them, so that it makes sense why I need to leave alone my normal jiko and take your clean jiko?
Right. So the question of affordability can be looked at 2 points. So one is the point of purchasing the solution. So like you said, purchasing the jiko. So if it's an LPG stove, for example, so the cost of buying the tank and also the example. And it doesn't have to be LPG only. It can be the electric pressure cooker. It can be a bioethanol stove. So government can subsidize that, or you can also get other types of financing, like carbon finance, and we've seen some companies accelerate the rate of access to cleaner cooking solutions using carbon finance. But the second bit is significantly harder to solve, because are you going to subsidize continuous consumption? So we've seen in some other countries, and there are examples in very many countries, like Ecuador, where 90% of the households use LPG, or in India, where about 65% of the households use LPG. And they didn't start there. In fact, like India, just about 7 years ago, 60% of the households were using firewood. So just like we have here. But 7 years later, it's a reverse. But the challenge is always, how do you make the consumption affordable and sustainable? So there are innovative ways to think about it, and one example that I can point to is what actually is done in the electricity sector in Kenya. Because the electricity sector in Kenya, you have some consumers cross-subsidizing for other consumers. So across board, it becomes more affordable for everyone.
Now, so that's a plan that can be tested, tried and tested, and would it work if you're, you know, the electricity, when you say subsidizing electricity, you're talking about the last mile program?
Right, so the last mile program would be an example of a subsidy program for the first problem, which is getting the equipment or getting the connection. But you see, and there have been reports about this, even on the last mile program, very many households that were connected are not able to spend, say, more than 300 shillings. So they end up using the electricity just for lighting and charging their phones. So there are two bits to it. How do you get more households to actually have access? And then how do you get the households to continue using the solution and not backslide into firewood and charcoal, which are quite harmful for health and environment and climate.
Dr. Njenga, if, for instance, were to make these solutions affordable, are they really accessible to Kenyans?
Yeah. You see, the thing is that we have so many options when we say cleaner cooking, right? There is the ethanol, there is LPG, there is many of them, electricity and all that. So, and there is a lot of innovations around all these. And depending on the context, you know, what is good for which region. For example, if we want to look at even cleaner cooking with biomass, for example, and linking it to the 15 billion tree growing as the agenda. And people are able to grow trees on the farms without going to the forests. And then they make use of the prunings without cutting down the trees. And then they use improved stoves. So they are making improvements in along every stage, along the whole life cycle of whatever fuel it is. And depending on where, and there are also crop residues of various crops in different regions. And so this kind of biomass is available in that region, and the shorter the distances that the fuel is transported, the more the economic benefits. Yeah.
So, and these clean cooking solutions are things, some of these improved cook stoves, are they things you'd be able to build yourself, or do you need to buy? Like, for example, if you have the 3 stones, can you build an improvement with it yourself?
What I have seen is that women are so innovative. Women are so innovative. What they want is to, in the most affordable way, to put cooked food on the table. And so if you go to many households, you'll find that they are constructing earthen kind of clay stoves within their kitchens. And then they know the enemy is the silent killer, the smoke. And so they are working on pipes, some pipes, iron sheets or something, and then they are exhausting the smoke. And then they are making their own local innovations and making kitchens. And if you go to those kitchens, you can see all the difference, you know. So when it comes to the affordability, innovativeness, people are so innovative. Let's build on these local technologies, you know.
So that's a good point to take a break. When we come back, there's a question already for Engineer Kiva. Someone wants to know what happened to the 500 shilling gas that were promised and if it still exists, if that could address the issue of affordability of clean cooking. We'll take a break. The Nation Leadership Forum will be right back on the other side.
Where does my money go every month?
This again? It doesn't have to be like this. This is Loop, a digital smart wallet that links all our accounts from any bank. Take control, safe, secure. Wanna save more when making payments? Loop's got deals just for us, and we can pay into any bank or mobile wallet account. More control, higher setting limits, lower fees, less stress. Now, let's make next month a little better. We're smarter than this.
Download Loop and control all of your money from one app. Loop is regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya.
Wateja huprefer stock zangu. Juu ziko tayari kuvaliwa pap lakini vile hii ekonomi imetufinya. Ilinibidi kubadilisha sabuni nikatumia ingine rahisi. Bala, ilibidi nioshe kila kitu mara mbili. Sikuwa na otherwise, nikarudia Ariel. Mi hupata clean and fresh results kwa mwosho mmoja tu. Ariel ndio siri yangu. Sasa story yangu iko popular sana.
Ariel, usafi bora kwa mwosho mmoja tu.
We asked the children, how many of you brushed this morning? And this little boy, his hand didn't go up. And I said, well, why didn't you brush this morning? He said, my brother was using the toothbrush. If I'd waited for him, I would have been late for school. I'm sorry, I get a bit emotional when it comes to that. To be able to change a child's life, to be able to bring back that confidence about their smile, for me, is phenomenal.
Today we're on Happy Kenya Clean Toilet Mission. And we're visiting Mama Zawadi live in Nairobi. Come with me. Selena! Mama Zawadi, how do you keep your toilets clean?
I use normal detergent and bleach for washing.
The detergent and bleach cleanless can leave behind yellowness, rust, and germs. Harpic's 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergents and bleach, and kills 99.9% illness-causing germs in your toilet, including the COVID-19 virus.
Wow, Selena! Nimeamini sasa!
Really? Yes! Now that she's part of the mission, the next house is yours.
The police have caught the killer of Vasil's wife. It turned out to be a certain Kamil Baisarov.
Are you sure at all that she's telling the truth?
I don't know.
I think one of them is lying. The only question is, who will you believe?
We have to be patient and attentive to her because
Stop,
she's
please.
going through a hard
Please
time.
stop what you're saying.
And I am in a hurry to see her as well.
No, wait.
Let's do it tomorrow.
Wait,
tomorrow,
let's talk about
it.
I'm very excited to introduce Ushidi Gardens Nakuru. This property is developed by Optiven and we are doing compacted maram roads. We plant the trees, fence the property. So please call this number 0790 300 300. Optiven, we have you covered.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is the Nation Leadership Forum and you're talking about universal access of clean cooking and what that means for you as Kenya moves towards transitioning every single Kenyan household to clean cooking by the year 2028. And just before we went on break, Engineer Kiva, there was two questions for you actually, but I know you wanted to respond to the question on accessibility of these clean cooking technologies.
Thank you, Zainab. Indeed, as Dr. Mary has said, it is vital for citizens to be able to access the services because they are there. And what we realized is that because we have been working and facilitating the private sector as one way of accelerating access to clean cooking, and we noticed that many of the people have set up businesses. They are in areas which are like near the grid, in towns, near the towns. And we thought that the people who are far from these epicenters are they not getting services? So what we have done is to design a program under what we call COSAP, Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Program. It was basically based on solar, but we have brought in also clean cooking under it. And what we have done is to facilitate private sector to go and set up businesses in these counties which are noted as underserved in terms of electrification and also access to clean cooking. So the counties of Turkana, Mandera, Wajir, Tana River, all the way to Kwale, 14 of them. And what we do then is to have a result-based financing where we incentivize these business people to set up their value chains and be able to then avail these products to the citizens. One other thing we have done under this program, Zainab, is noting that they are really on the low income bracket, is to be able to also subsidize those improved cookstoves by working through those value chains so that many people can be able to afford and be able to be moved from the traditional cooking methods into cleaner fuels. So that's one of the things that the government has done, and we hope to continue doing that so that everywhere there is accessibility.
Okay, so now the question that was raised to you before we went to the break. Kenyans were promised gas of 500 shillings. In fact, the question says, ask engineer where that gas for 500 shillings went, or if it still exists.
Zainab, as you alluded, indeed there was a cabinet discussion this week, and what the government wants to do is now to implement the LPG strategy. And the LPG strategy has a number of things that the government is going to do. One of them is to be able to do the infrastructure for LPG and have one common user terminal at the coastal area, and then after that facilitate the private sector to have refilling stations in the hinterland. So once the government sets up that infrastructure, the other thing is to facilitate the private sector who are already in the business, and using their value chain, they will be able now to be able to supply subsidized LPG cylinders. Now, the LPG itself then will be bought through an OTS system. When it is bought through an OTS system, we envisage that the price is going to go low. The other thing is that government has already commenced doing some fiscal incentives to the price of LPG. Already some taxes have been reduced, and in that cabinet paper, the government has said it's going to review the taxes even further lower. The idea is that we should be able to afford the cylinder itself, because even that one, the VAT has already been removed, and the government is also going to seek to encourage local production. And then after that, once you get the cylinder, like a 6 kilogram cylinder, then the gas is going to be bought through OTS. Already the government has assisted with the value chain of it, doing the infrastructure. So now the last mile, which is going to be done by the business people, you'll be able to get gas at many areas and also at an affordable price.
And how long do you envision all of this happening?
This one, as I saw, some activities I saw are already going to start in October and moving forward. There are discussions, those which require to go to Parliament, like further tax reductions are going to be taken to Parliament, but already then we are going to consider the issues of building the common user facility.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Njenga, what are some of the most promising innovations you're seeing in your research?
In the bioenergy arena, for example, the work we do, one of the things that we are really working towards is energy trees, for example. When you look at the communities, they have certain tree species that they prefer for firewood. Because, you know, if you look at when somebody is cooking, for example, you can see that the soot on the pot, the amount of it is different from when you use different tree species. So what we are working on is the bioenergy tree portfolio, for example. Which are these tree species that can be grown for energy in different regions? Because if you are in Turkana, there is the species that do well there. If you are in a different place, so we are looking at the whole country, which is the right tree for the right purpose, and one of the innovations. And the other one is looking at the multi-purpose trees that you find farmers are also growing, for example, like fruit trees. These fruit trees requires pruning as a silvicultural practice, you know, for them to remove the branches, and then you can get more fruits. Those branches then go into using for bioenergy. And then we are also working on wood rods, you know, small plots within the farm where you are having like a small forest, we can call it. And people are locating these wood rods in the areas which are less fertile, let's say for crops, and then you are establishing these. Or even on the boundaries. If you look at some places like Embu, look at some places like Muranga, you find that homes have a lot of trees, and then they are able to get the trees, they prune them, and they dry them very well. That curing process. And then they can use them. They are ready when the rains come, yeah? And then trying to mix that then with improved stuff where you are using the firewood, and then you are harvesting the charcoal before it turns into ash. And then you are using that. That's what they call biochar, but it's really charcoal when you bury it in the soil. And people are using that charcoal to put it in the soil for soil improvement.
Yes.
It enhances water retention, nutrient retention, and then there is higher yields. So we are looking at bioenergy from a system perspective where it's addressing people's energy needs, it's addressing people's soil improvements for food security, reducing health related to smoke. So we are looking at it from that perspective. And these are innovations that we are really putting into context. Where does it work, for who and how?
And you haven't found identified those trees yet?
No, we have identified. If you look at some places, for example, you see like the acacia trees in the dry lands.
Yes.
They are highly preferred for charcoal. And so people are really managing this through natural regeneration instead of, look, nobody should be cutting trees down for charcoal. They can either use the prunings or they can grow them for charcoal. And so we are looking, you know, like those acacia trees, fast maturing trees, so that within, let's say, 4 or 5 years, you're already harvesting the trees and then rotating.
Okay, Barasa, you mentioned the best practices, and you cited Peru and India. Have you seen parts of Kenya that can be used as best practice areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And Zainab, if you allow me, if I could just touch on some of the innovations that we're actually seeing, just very briefly. So about 20 years ago, only about 20% of households in Kenya had access to electricity. And around the same time, only about 10 to 15% were using clean cooking solutions. So fast forward to today, about 80% of households have electricity in their house, but only about 30% are using a clean cooking technology. So one of the interesting innovations is around electric cooking. And I know many times when we raise the issue of electric cooking, people say it's an elitist thing. You know, hiyo ni watu wa Muthaiga, watu wa Karen. But there was a study in 2016 by the World Bank which looked at electric cooking usage. And the surprising thing was that the largest proportion of households that cook with electricity were actually in Kibera and Mathare. The reason is you can get electricity illegally. So of course we are not trying to promote illegal connections, but the point being made is that people can actually cook with electricity, even people with low income. So there are innovations around electric pressure cooking. There are innovations around induction stoves. Of course, they're still very expensive, but that's one area to watch out. The other one is on bioethanol. And there's a company in Kenya that imports 3 million liters of bioethanol every month. If you just consider that being produced locally, those are jobs in the sugar belt. Those are jobs as far as people growing cassava and other energy crops. To your question, very, very briefly, is there a place in Kenya where we can see this innovation? Yes. Actually, it's here in Nairobi. There's a study that was done just this year, around June, and the finding was that 82% of households in Nairobi actually use a clean cooking technology. So that's very hopeful. In fact, for me, what that says, policy, institutional frameworks, financing could be barriers, but those are not necessarily the primary barriers, because in Nairobi, we've been able to get to that. Of course, the income levels of people in Nairobi are different. Of course, the distribution network in Nairobi is easier. It's not like in Loyangalani in those counties that engineers mentioned. But there's hope, because if Nairobians who live in the same policy environment, the same country, have been able to get to 82%, then I think it can be done also in other counties.
Okay. Dr. Davis, have we done enough education and awareness among Kenyans to know why they really need to transition out of clean cooking?
Into clean cooking, yes. That's a great question. And I want to provide a bridge of discussion to what my colleagues have said. So Engineer talked about LPG, we've talked about biomass cooking, ethanol cooking, electricity. So it is important that your viewer understands with clarity after today, that is part of the awareness, what exactly is clean cooking, right? So yes, there are cleaner solutions, but you really want to make sure that you are cooking in an environment with minimal emissions. Minimal emissions, and that is when your health is impacted, right? So we've talked about soot situations, we've talked about when you're cooking and you're coughing and you can tell from that day that your health is impacted. The kerosene, the smell, what that looks like, right? So it's very, very important that we understand that when you talk about clean cooking, we really are looking at different categories of clean cooking, right? So we've talked about the category of LPG. We've talked about the category of ethanol cooking, which I'm a practitioner in. As Murefu said, we're growing cassava and we're making ethanol for domestic production. We've talked about electricity. So what I'd like the viewers to understand in terms of awareness is, number one is examine your environment, as Dr. Njenga has said. Look at your entire system of cooking. Right? And you can ask yourself questions, right? Around the cooking environment, what is the implement you're using for cooking, right? The 3 stone fires, how are you improving those environments, right? So, so it's very, very important. It's very, very important that the consumer actually understands where they are in the mix, in the different categories. Are you on the charcoal, right? And if you're on the charcoal, how are you burning this charcoal? Right? Are you on the firewood? How are you burning this firewood? And then are you also aware of innovations that have been described here, such as ethanol cooking fuel, such as electricity, such as LPG, and other solutions that are around there, right? So that is what I really think that is very, very important. That start with asking yourself where you are, how are you cooking, right? And, the implications are when you do a self-assessment, you can tell whether you're using a clean cooking solution or not.
Now, you mentioned charcoal, and a lot of times when you're buying charcoal, you don't know what tree was used to make the charcoal, or you're buying it knowing that imekauka vizuri, na ukipika nao itakuwa sawa. Until you get home and realize, hey, this charcoal has way more smoke than it does fire. How is it possible if you're in the charcoal spectrum, is it possible to, what's the word, know if the charcoal you're getting is going to be more dirty than?
So again, to avoid confusion, right? When you're cooking with a biomass, like charcoal, right? So I like to think of those as transitional fuels, right? Real clean solutions are clean burning, right? So the question of this one imeleta moshi na hii haijaleta moshi is probably not the right one, right? So as a charcoal community, right, really understanding, for example, if I want to make my charcoal usage better, then you're looking at the implements, the cooking solution, right? You're looking at the cook stove that you're using, and you're looking at the environment that you're using the cook stove, and that is outside. You do not want to be using your charcoal jiko in the home, right? Because you're going to be releasing noxious gases, which will impact your health. There's no two questions around it. Whether you can see the smoke, you can smell it. Having a biomass burning jiko, whether it says on the box reduces emissions by 50%, where did the other 50% go?
Yes.
You're breathing it,
Yes.
right? So you want to make sure that you have the cleanliness from the implement, the fuel, and where you're doing it. So if you're on the charcoal, make sure you can try and buy an improved cook stove and cook outside, right? Or in a well-ventilated kitchen. If you're on the firewood, again, there are innovations that Mary Njenga has spoken about. With electricity, there's EPC, electric pressure cooker. With bioethanol, which is, as like I said, I'm a practitioner in that, there are cooking solutions around that. With LPG, we're all familiar with that. So you really have to look at where you are and make that a little bit better, you know, and to actually get to a really clean solution that hits all the boxes. One, it's good for your health, like it doesn't impact your health, not kidogo 50% or whatever it is, fully does not impact your health. It does not impact the environment, right, in the sense that deforestation-based logging, and it doesn't impact climate change as well. So you really want to look at, you know, the whole life cycle of your solution and make sure it is truly clean.
I want to pick up again on the issue of using electricity to cook. And Dr. Davis there has clarified electric pressure cooker. And again, we've mentioned the cost of clean cooking solutions. An electric pressure cooker is not a cheap thing to buy. So if you're telling me that it's cheaper to cook with electricity, for example, if I'm in the city, compared to if I want to cook githeri, it's cheaper to use electricity. First of all, if I'm using this electric pressure cooker, is it githeri that's been pre-soaked? Or githeri ile menua kwa soko, mahindi mekauka, maragwe mekauka, naweka yote kwa pressure cooker. You know the kind of githeri that you leave on the fire overnight in the village. What kind of githeri are you putting in that pressure cooker? And why does this cooking with 2 units of githeri only work with a pressure cooker?
Okay, so to your first issue, it's really about the cost of this electric pressure cooker. We know that for us to be able to also bring down the cost, we need to increase the uptake. We need to have some, to have it at scale. And that's what the government is looking at scale, at the speed, and also at the affordability. And one of the things as government we do is to be able to see how we can facilitate the private sector to get these electric pressure cookers in a cheap way. And one of the things, of course, is the fiscal regime about reduction of taxes. But again, there is also one of our development partners. We are looking to have a big program on electric pressure cookers, utilizing the carbon which we are going to offset. So the idea is using the monies that you are going to save on the emissions, and then we attach ourselves to somebody who can be able to purchase these carbon credits. And that value now goes into subsidizing or goes into buying down the cost of not only the pressure cooker, but also the electricity moving forward. Because as you cook with it, then you are going to be saving on greenhouse gas emission as long as you cook with it. So the equivalent for that, what you can get from carbon trading, can then be plowed back, and it can then be able to bring down your cost of electricity in the next month. So that's one of the things that we intend to do. And as we increase awareness of people, as many people are buying these implements, then the cost obviously is going to come down.
So you'll be working with the private sector who supply or manufacture these pressure cookers so that they can do it cheaper, so that when I buy it, because currently it costs nearly 10,000 shillings to buy. So when I buy it, it will be less than that. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And even by the virtue of the government setting up the strategic goal that we want to transition to clean energy by 2028. Already the business people, the manufacturers have already seen there is an opportunity there. Indeed, I know like 2 years or so ago, one of the companies which produces these electric cookers here around Nairobi installed a new factory, because the demand, they can already see the demand is going to be high. When you do that now, and you manufacture scale, then per unit also comes down. And then we are also going to be involved in a lot of awareness creation. Like Linda said, we need to do a lot of awareness for these emerging technologies, the electric cooking, the ethanol cooking fuels, so that people can be able to uptake this. There is also another one like biogas in rural areas or peri-urban where you have some cattle, about 4 or 5. You can be able to do a biodigester and be able to get clean biogas to be able to cook with. So a lot of awareness and government looking at what we can do to be able to leverage what the private sector is already doing out there on the ground.
So again, another question has just come for you. Somebody says, no, please explain that again, how it's possible to cook electricity with to cook githeri with 2 units, and why can't I just do that for everything without using a pressure cooker? Just use electricity without the pressure cooker.
Well, you know, pressure cooker then assists you because it is, when you are cooking, as my colleagues have said, you also look at how you are going to do it. And it is good to do it in an energy efficient way. So like why the open fires, other than adding to the smoke and the indoor air pollution, the other thing is that they are not sustainable because there is a lot of wastage. It is open, so a lot of it is going through. But with an electric pressure cooker, then you are having a more energy efficient implement. You are conserving that heat over there, and then the combination of heat and the pressure will give you a food which is cooked well.
Dr. Davis, I hear you laughing. Have you tried that experiment yourself?
No, absolutely. The
And does it work?
Of course, it does. It does. But I want to pick up one very important point on the awareness, right? You know, we have a Clean Cooking Week coming as the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, and a lot of organizations that work in this area are really putting themselves out to really create education and showcase their solutions, right? So I really would want to urge your viewers to really look out October 22nd, coming up, October 22nd to 26th. There's going to be a lot of conversations around clean cooking. I'd encourage everyone to, now's the time to ask questions. These questions, this is a short panel, but on the 22nd to 26th, during the Clean Cooking Week, there's going to be a lot of government awareness programs, private sector awareness programs happening all over Kenya. And that will be the time to really contact your local county, contact your local county organization, and really understand what are these solutions. So you can actually interact with them. I know, pretty much many counties are going to be participating on a local level. So you can actually go and access and ask questions of your local practitioners, of your local government. What are they doing for clean cooking for the people that they actually serve?
Interesting. Barasa, have you seen any gaps in policy or regulation in this clean cooking space?
Right. There are many gaps. I was just thinking about the viewer who was asking about the EPC and the 2 units, and maybe this is an analogy that may help. If you put this piece of paper out in the sun, it's not going to burn even if you leave it from morning till evening. But if you have a magnifying glass, the same amount of energy from the sun can actually cause this piece of paper to burn. So it's not a very accurate analogy, but the EPC, the electric pressure cooker, the way it's designed, the way it's insulated, and the way it concentrates the energy from the electricity enables it to cook faster using less electricity. So yes, in fact, we have done a study comparing cooking with electricity and LPG, and cooking with electricity is surprisingly very, very affordable. But
provided you have an electric cooker.
I don't have an EPC. This is something that I need to correct, but we have an electric cooker at the house. To your question on policy, I would say that Kenya as a country has been very progressive in terms of policy. And a good example is LPG. The rate of use of LPG has accelerated dramatically over the last 10 or so years, and this is because of policy. Engineer Kiva touched on some of the issues on taxation, so VAT exemption, issues around the local manufacturing of the cylinders, refilling. All this is because of a supporting policy. But there are gaps, obviously. One of the ones that I would actually like to throw to Engineer Kiva and the government colleagues is promoting local manufacturing. Because when you talk about cooking, many times it's relegated to a residential issue in the kitchen. But cooking is also about job creation. There's a company in Kenya that employs 3,000 Kenyans. It's a cooking, manufacturing, and assembly company. 3,000 Kenyans, if you count the casuals and the ones on contract. Safaricom employs about 6,000 Kenyans. This is a cooking company. And this company exports to DRC, to Tanzania, to Uganda. So cooking is beyond just the thing that we do in the kitchen. Of course, that's where it starts, but it doesn't end there. So one of the policy gaps, I would say, is to promote local manufacturing and assembly. So things to do with import duties on equipment. There's a company that's thinking of setting up micro distilleries for bioethanol. So these are small contraptions that can use, say, bagasse from the sugar sector and convert that into bioethanol. But they need to get favorable tax regimes to import these micro distilleries because they're not used here. And then the last thing is also on local production of the fuels. So like Linda mentioned, and her company is working with women at the coast to grow cassava. So they're getting a livelihood, they're getting employment, and this is really how we should look at cooking. So not just the policies to acquire and use the fuel, but the broader issues of environment, the broader issues of employment, the broader issues of forex. Because when we are not importing LPG, for example, we are not using the foreign currency that we really need in the country.
Right. Dr. Njenga, what would you like Kenyans to remember from this conversation?
One of the things that is good to remember is related to relate cooking energy and something like climate change, okay? And one of the things is to look at how can cleaner cooking contribute to reducing emissions so that we can reduce the global warming, and also how can the energy systems, let's say growing energy, contribute to being sinks, like absorbing the carbon dioxide, such that they are doing both ways. We are reducing emissions as much as possible from cooking and processing, but also growing, for example, like trees. Even if we are growing them for energy, they are having other multiple benefits of absorbing the carbon dioxide. One of the things that really we have worked on with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum is to develop the bioenergy strategy, 2020 to 2027, and we were relating it to the big global challenges. And when I say global challenges, these challenges are also facing Kenya as a country. So we were looking at from how we produce biomass energy, and when I say biomass, it's both for liquid, like what Dr. Rinda is working on, and when we are looking at the solid biomass and the gaseous. And there are a lot of innovations even on biomass electricity being produced from biomass material. So what I would really like us to believe in is that bioenergy can be made truly sustainable, addressing sustainability inefficiencies at every single stage along the way. And then looking at how does it contribute to enterprises development, job creation around the whole thing, and answering the real challenges that are touching on people, and also looking at multiple benefits. Promoting livelihoods, you know, and but in a cleaner way, for sure, in a cleaner way.
And that's an excellent point to wrap up this conversation. I promise that we'll have another conversation with the CS for Energy himself, talking about the LPG policy, and he has arrived. And yes, we are going to be talking about that policy on the other side of this break. I'd like to thank my panel here, Engineer Kiva right next to me, Dr. Mary Njenga from ICRAF. I'd also like to thank Murefu Barasa and, of course, Dr. Linda Davis, all of you for sharing your expertise. This conversation does not end here. You can still follow it online at the hashtag NMG Leadership Forum. You can also tweet them individually and ask your questions. When we come back from this break, we will have the CS Davis Chirchir on the set. We'll be right back.